Am I on? Hello everyone! Welcome to today's stream. Hello, every pony. How are you all today? Let's see, is the microphone turned on? Oh, I gotta turn that on. Didn't realize we didn't have the background music on yesterday. I hope I did, but I don't know if we did. Hello everyone! Welcome to today's stream, where we are going to continue reading Sunsets and Freedom by NX. Hello everybody. Take your time coming in. I hope you all are doing well today. I'm doing alright. A little sniffling and a little sleepy, but doing good. Okay. Well, it's about time. I gave people, so I like to give people like the 15 minutes before stream to show up and they'll get notified, but let's just dive right into it. I'm so excited. I last time when we ended, I just couldn't wait to continue, so I just read the whole thing by myself. I finished it all by myself, so now I'm gonna go back to reading it, but with all of you, so it's gonna be fun. Okay, let's pull it up. Sunsets and Freedom. So in the last chapter, oh gosh, now I'm gonna get confused between what I read and what, like, we read together. Last chapter, Tommy went back with the SBI, whatever their company is called, and he was like, sure, I'll help you guys, and I'm pretty sure they found him stealing, like, looking for information or something. And they also saw that he had a bunch of bruises and other things. So, let's just begin this chapter. My hands are shaking with an anticipation. Okay, your trigger warnings for this chapter are flinching and vague mentions of implied child abuse. Child abuse. I don't know why I said it like abuse. Abuse. Oh no, I'm laughing at that word. No, this is embarrassing. Okay, Sunsets and Freedom, Chapter 5. We had a bonding moment, but my trauma said no. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think I've been this mad since we found Ronbu, Wilbur announced after they were sure Tommy was asleep. I'm inclined to agree with Wilbur, Techno muttered. I have less scars than him, and that's just what we can see. He wasn't fazed by it, like normally people don't like to show their scars and are visibly uncomfortable with them. I know I can be, but he was very calm about it, like it was just a common thing, Ronbu spoke up. It probably was a common thing, Tubbo grumbled. It had to be. Him and anyone else who was kept with him must have been just as badly scarred, if not worse. This is serious. We've seen bad containment centers. None of them compare to this level of injuries, Phil said. This may not just be a containment center. They're obviously abusing them and making them forget their powers. I think this containment center is more like a rehabilitation center. What do you mean? Techno asked, straightening. I think they're brainwashing people they're containing, Phil replied bluntly. They take away the cards and anything else that could remind them of their powers. They train them to forget their powers and never use them again. No more danger, but the person inside is gone too, probably trying to beat it out of them. That's sickening, Ranbu muttered, not even being able to imagine not having his powers or being beaten until he couldn't even begin to think about using them, the way Tommy reacted when touching things. Tommy can't turn it off though, neither can I. What would they do in cases like that? Tebo asked. Phil clenched his jaw. Death probably, or other forms of breaking someone, he muttered. It's probably why Tommy finally ran. He knew he was going to die. If you can't turn off your power and can't be trained to never use them, their fate is death. Ugh, heck, Wilbur breathed. If this is actually going on, then we might need to gather an actual task force, Techno said. Should we start now or wait until we're sure? Now, make sure everyone knows we're on call. They're on call at all times. Tell them to be ready whenever. If we call, they need to be here in less than 3 minutes, Phil said. Wait until tomorrow. The last thing we need right now is them panicking. Probably best, Wilbur muttered. They'd all want to meet and talk to Tommy. It'll probably overwhelm him and probably lead him to run away again. Not necessarily, Techno told him. He seemed very relieved when he noticed there were more of us when we first met. It's almost like he likes the fact that there are a lot of us. I think he's lying, Tebo spoke up, almost randomly. What? Phil asked. I think Tommy is lying. I assume it's about his powers, but if not, then that's something else, but I know he's not being entirely truthful. I have to admit, I didn't check, but I think Tommy was lying about his powers as well, Wilbur agreed. I noticed him fiddling with that fork for a while before his demonstration. He had held that napkin for a significantly less amount of time than he did the fork. I think it could just be straight up disintegration. It just takes a while, Wilbur said. It would make sense. He did drop my ID card as soon as he finished reading it, Tebo said. He wouldn't even touch mine when he had his gloves off, Ranbu muttered. Gloves? Techno asked. He has these black gloves, 2 pairs. One is fingerless and the other is just regular pair. But he wore them until Ranbu came back with him, Tebo explained. He had taken them off. Only once I cornered him, Ranbu said. He wears them all the time. It's probably infused or made of one material he can't disintegrate, Phil said. Like how heated obsidian can cut you, Tebo. Tebo scrunched up his nose at that. The only thing that could puncture his skin was heated obsidian blades. Although it couldn't do any lasting damage nor get anywhere near killing him, he still hated it. They were the one thing that could hurt him, and he didn't like being reminded of it. So he's lying to us then? Techno asked. Like we're fully aware of this and it's a basic fact at this point? Yeah, Wilbur said. He probably doesn't fully trust us. Well, more specifically you. He doesn't completely trust me and Tebo, but way more than you. And if any of you guys asked him to come with us, he'd be halfway out of the state right now. But I think he's just trying to protect himself from another incident, like whatever his old containment center did to him, Ranbu said. I probably would have lied as well, if I could when you guys rescued me. I'd be completely unsure of what was actually safe or not. Captivity will do that, Phil muttered, more to himself than the rest of them. We're going to keep helping him, right? Tebo asked. Yes, Wilbur answered instantly. Techno gave him a look. Well, it's not like we're going to kick him out again. I don't care if he's lying. He's a kid, an obviously traumatized one. He's going to lie. Wilbur's right, Phil said. We're going to help him regardless, but we need to make sure he knows that he has to be truthful if we're going to help him. We physically cannot do anything if we don't know what's real and what's not. Agreed? Wilbur asked. Everyone nodded, even Techno. Wilbur counted this as a win. It's warm. It hasn't been warm in a really long time. In fact, he remembers that he was cold just a moment ago. It was freezing, perhaps, but right now it was warm. It was familiar kind of warmth, something that you've known for a while, like coming home after an uncomfortable vacation, like a hug. A nice hug from someone you haven't seen in a long while. Something was just right about this warmness. The cold had been cruel, also familiar, but in a terrible way. In a way in which no one should be familiar with. It was unrelenting and heavy, oppressive and awful. The cold was never a good sign. It meant bad things were coming. Being cold couldn't be a death sentence and you couldn't do anything about it. Cold was dread and torture. What else could it be? But this was warmth. A warmth he hadn't felt in a long time, if ever. Perhaps once he knew this warmth. Perhaps this was once the norm rather than the brutal cold. But it's not like he could remember. He couldn't remember his mom, but he knew she existed. Similarly to this, maybe he couldn't remember this warmth. Maybe it was just a feeling of anomia, and his Harassment was just too strong. Maybe it had never existed in the past, but he liked it now. The warmth of a mother's hug, the warmth of feeling safe. He hadn't felt truly safe in a long time. The feeling presented itself occasionally, however it never stayed. This was different, lingering and staying at his eyes as his eyes were closed. He hadn't felt even a fraction of safe while his eyes were closed for a long time, as long as he can remember. This was great. Warm, sleepy, drifting but not dangerously. Lovely. Tommy woke up, like actually just woke up. No screaming or throwing himself out of bed or a scary grip on his throat that always turned out to be himself in the end. It had been a while since he woke up rather than startled awake. It was nice. It was a nice change of pace. Although he can't say he wasn't completely not startled awake. Earlier in the night he had barely stopped himself from screaming when he woke up. Doing that on his first night would have gotten him kicked out, and he didn't want that, especially not before he got the whole reason why he came here. He honestly couldn't believe his luck that the computer room was on this floor. But there had been something that lulled him back to sleep after his first wake up. He hadn't woken up like a normal person in a long time. It was strange, and he was definitely still tired, but it was a nice sleep. Well, tired probably wasn't the right word. Sleepy was probably better. He hadn't felt sleepy before. Not really. He was either tired or wide awake. Never sleepy. Never a nice feeling of tiredness. Just pure, put me to sleep or kill me kind of tired. Sleepy was definitely nicer. There wasn't a clock in his room, so he had no idea what time it was, nor how long he had slept. Either way, he bet it was for too long. He should get up. Walking would do him good. Wake himself up a bit. He had looked around last night and remembered the way back to the living room. The room was bright, the natural light illuminating it in a way that the fluorescent ones couldn't. He liked it better this way. It looked nicer with the natural light rather than the overhead ones. The TV was on, but it wasn't making any noise. Maybe it was broken. Although based on the buildings and the apartment itself, Tommy thought they would have replaced it the moment it broke. They were probably waiting for someone to deliver it. It's not like they kept a stash of TVs somewhere in the building. Although they had the room for it, he doubted it was a thing that people did. Only Wilbur sat in the living room. No one else was there. He assumed that everyone had left. It must have been pretty late then. Tommy might be in trouble. He wasn't really allowed to sleep late in the compound. But Rambu said this wasn't the compound, and maybe things were okay. Although the natural light was better, it was still a little too bright, and Tommy was still not fully awake. He squinted for a bit as he walked into the room. Although as soon as he saw there was a straight path to the couch, he opted for closing his eyes and making a beeline for it. If Wilbur was mad at him, then at least he could sit down, even for just a second, before anything happened. To be honest, the last thing Wilbur was expecting when he agreed to stay with Tommy a while Phil went down to his office to get things ready, and Techno slept because his sleep schedule was somehow more messed up than Wilbur's was for Tommy to just walk to the couch and curl up right next to him. It was pretty obvious that he was still tired and waking up, but Wilbur wasn't quite sure what to do. He was glad Tommy at least felt safe enough to do this close to him, but he didn't want to mess up and make Tommy run again. "How'd you sleep?" Wilbur asked, hoping his voice didn't sound as forced as it was. Luckily, Tommy didn't seem to notice. "Good," he muttered. Wilbur was once again surprised by this kid. He had barely spoken to them the night before, and that was when Tubbo and Rambu were with him. Now he was alone with Wilbur and actually talking to him. Progress. This was good. "I'm glad. I know it can be hard sleeping in a new place," Wilbur said. Small talk. This was good. Wilbur was good at small talk. He was good with people. He could totally do this. Making small talk with a traumatized child was a little different than most people, but he could still do this. "I heard you playing last night," Tommy muttered. Tommy beat him to it. "Wait." Wilbur froze slightly. He hadn't thought Tommy could hear him. The walls were thinner than he thought he guessed. Techno had always been a light sleeper, but he was pretty far from Wilbur's room. Phil was pretty heavy sleeper unless you touched him. I'm sorry," Wilbur said sheepishly, although Tommy surprised him further by shaking his head. "No, I liked it. I had woken up and the music was nice," he hummed. "I haven't slept that well in a long time." Wilbur blinked, his heart clenching at the implications. "Oh?" he asked, more in surprise than anything else. "Warm," was all the explanation he was given. "I'm glad then," Wilbur answered. as Tommy melted into the couch a little bit more. Honestly, he looked more like a kid now than he had before. Despite the amount of scars, he looked like any teen his age. And Wilbur's old clothes, still way too big for him. He looked so small. Wilbur liked this version of Sleepy Tommy. He was nice, chatty even, and he liked Wilbur's music. Something told Wilbur he didn't give compliments often. The train one was nice. Angry, but I liked it, Tommy said, his eyes still closed as he let the couch dip a little closer to Wilbur. Jubilee line? Wilbur asked, confused at how a song like that could lull someone to sleep. Tommy nodded, a little more exaggerated than he needed to be. It was the melody, I think. I liked it, Tommy said. I couldn't hear the words much, besides from the train part. That would explain it. Despite the lyrics and the sudden rise in volume if you were hearing it through a wall, Wilbur could see how Tommy could fall asleep. It gave him a sense of pride that his music that made Tommy fall asleep so well, and apparently feel warm. I'm glad, Wilbur hummed, more to himself than to Tommy. What was it about? Tommy asked then, definitely getting more awake. At least he sounded like he was getting less and less tired. Wilbur wasn't sure how to answer his question. What was Jubilee Line about? Well, a lot of things, and none of them were good, and certainly nothing he particularly wanted to tell Tommy about. Bad stuff, Wilbur settled on the answer. Tommy snorted in reply. I've seen some bad stuff, he said. Wilbur hadn't doubted that. The scars he had definitely were proof that he had seen some bad stuff. Although Jubilee Line was a different kind of bad stuff. I'm sure, Wilbur said, not meaning how sarcastic it ended up sounding. Oh, thank you so much in chat. That makes me feel so happy. Okay, back to reading. I have, you prick. I've seen stuff. Wilbur couldn't help the laugh as the way he phrased it. This last line being muttered more than said. It sounded more like a movie line rather than an actual argument. Dickhead, Tommy muttered. I didn't mean to discredit you. It was just your phrasing, Wilbur explained. A relaxed smile found its way onto his face. My phrasing was frickin' perfect, Tommy grumbled, crossing his arms and pouting slightly. He was definitely much more awake right now. It was hilarious. You sounded like an angsty soldier from a bad movie, Wilbur joked, noticing how despite the fact that Tommy was probably fully awake now, he was still sitting closer to Wilbur than before. I haven't seen that one, Tommy murmured, seemingly thinking. Which one? Wilbur asked, confused about what Tommy was referring to. Bad movie, Tommy answered, plainly. Wilbur forgot this kid had probably not understood much about the world outside of whatever center he had been held in. Not anymore, at least. Rambu had been the same way. I meant a movie that was bad, not specifically bad movie. Dummy. It was an affectionate. He swears. I'm not a dummy, dickhead. I'm the smartest man you'll ever meet, Tommy exclaimed quickly. You're a child, Wilbur replied with a single raised eyebrow. I'm not. I'm a big, huge, smart man, I'll have you know, Tommy huffed, sending a glare straight at Wilbur. He rolled his eyes at the younger's antics. Sure, Wilbur muttered. It wasn't my phrasing that time. Dickhead, Tommy shot back. I will not argue grammar with a child, Wilbur replied. Big man, he insisted. Whatever, Wilbur had noticed the gap between them that was actually pretty small now, smaller than before. Tommy was probably afraid to initiate actual contact. Wilbur didn't blame him. The only human contact he seemed to have had created those scars, if they could be called human, whoever they were. So Wilbur reached out. He reached out and put his arm around Tommy, well, more so on the back of the couch, so that he could slowly make it so that the arm would be around him, although Tommy seemingly didn't get the message. He flung himself away from Wilbur and practically off the couch. He caught himself before he hit the floor and instead lowered himself to a sitting on it. Tommy blinked a couple times, breathing heavily and staring at Wilbur before he ducked his head. Wilbur could have swore he saw Tommy looking embarrassed before he turned away. I'm going to go to my room, Tommy muttered before hopping up and hurriedly shuffling back down the hallway towards his room. Wilbur let out a sigh. That ended horribly. Phil, I swear, I will die for this kid, Wilbur announced, stepping on into his father's office. Phil raised an eyebrow and looked at his son. Oh, he asked. I assume you mean Tommy? Yeah, Wilbur said. He came into the living room around 11, right? He looked so small in my old clothes, like an actual child. but he apparently woke up last night and heard me playing, and apparently it lulled him back to the best sleep he's had in a long time. He just went warm, as an explanation. Warm? Phil asked. Yeah, which is strange since it was Jubilee line, but apparently it was the melody. He had actually spoken to me, like an actual person, and even though at the beginning it was because he was tired, he's such a good kid, Phil, Wilbur gushed. I'm glad you're getting him to talk, Phil said with a soft smile. Wilbur often got attached to people, but never like this. He never came ranting to Phil about it, usually only gushing about them when prompted. Wilbur really liked this one. The kid's got a quick wit, Wilbur laughed, and a mouth, but that's nothing new. Phil snorted. Cursing was nothing new to this place. In fact, it was rare to go a conversation without the word frick, but it was then to be heard without it, not including when they had a guest over, hence why it wasn't said often when Tommy was around, although Phil guessed that was out the window. Seems like the two of you like each other, Phil mused, glad that Tommy was branching out and at least started to talk to someone, even if it was casual and not about whatever center they held him in. Yeah, Wilbur trailed off. Phil gave him a questioning look. Wilbur sighed. I tried to put my arm around him, not completely, but just something. He had been practically inching himself towards me the entire conversation. I figured if I was the one to initiate it, he'd be okay. But, Phil prompted. He flinched, Wilbur finished, like violently, almost throwing himself off the couch to avoid me. I paused. I didn't mean to make him uncomfortable, but before I could recover from that kind of reaction, he stood up and told me he was going to his room. Oh, Phil said, disappointed. Whoever did that to him. Phil, that kind of reaction. I know, Will, Phil said. Wilbur looked like he wanted to say more, but before he could, Phil's intercom made a noise. We have an issue up here, Techno's voice came through. The intercoms were in everyone's office, plus every work-related room in the building. That way everyone could be contacted in case of emergency. It involves our guest, Techno said. To be fair, Tommy didn't expect to be caught. He had thought everyone was out. No one but Wilbur was in the living room, and if that one episode of the cop show Tommy watched was anything to go by, families were always in the living room when they were home. He guessed in retrospect that made little sense. He hadn't gone back to his room when he flinched back from Wilbur. He hadn't meant to, especially not so violently, but whatever the people back at the compound put their arms around him, it usually meant he was going somewhere. While being his room was no fun and cramped and honestly just an awful time, leaving was almost always worse. So when Wilbur went to put his arm around him in a friendly gesture, Tommy had seen people do it all the time, but he just reacted as if he was back at the compound. He didn't want to leave, and Wilbur was great, despite being embarrassed about what he said when he was still waking up. Wilbur and him seemed to match up pretty well. He really hoped he didn't just ruin it by basically throwing himself off the couch just to get away from him. That's why he had to go do this now, just in case he was going to be kicked out whenever everyone else came home. He had made his way back to the computer's room rather than heading back to his room like he had muttered to Wilbur on his way out of the living room. It was just as dark as it had been the night before. No windows in the hallway or in the room itself. Tommy didn't think that turning on the light was worth it. It would be pretty obvious that he was in there if he turned it on. The only light coming from the computers themselves. The monitors were bright and almost blinded him as his eyes had just gotten used to the dark. The computers were password protected. Smart. Even though it was at the top floor of their own building, their computers were still protected by a password. It meant that there was at least something on these computers worth protecting. Chances were it was what Tommy needed. Whatever that was exactly, he wasn't sure. Just that it was probably here based on what he heard from both Tubbo and Ronbu. 3 icons showed up, a sword, wing, and a guitar. It wasn't hard to tell whose were whose. He clicked Wilbur's icon, figuring it'd be the easiest to figure out. After all, he was the only one who Tommy had an actual conversation with. He stared at the screen for a moment, racking his brain for anything that could have been a password. He shrugged and decided to type the first thing that popped into his head. Capital T-R-A-I-N-S. The computer denied his access to the rest of it. Apparently that wasn't correct. Although something bugged him. Despite the fact that Tommy was tired or sleepy, he wasn't even sure anymore. He noticed that Wilbur seemed to perk up at the mention of trains. At least when Tommy mentioned only really hearing about trains in Wilbur's song. He paused for a minute and then tried again. Lowercase. T-R-A-I-N-S. The computer logged him in. Of course. Of freaking course. Wilbur hadn't capitalized the password. Such a stupid and meaningless thing. Although if Tommy was thinking about it, most people capitalized the first letter, so in a way Wilbur had kind of played the system. Hey, Tommy had fallen for it. Still, it was a pretty stupid way to get fricked out at the last second. Quickly, he checked the files and went straight for the information-based ones. He clicked on the database link, and it led him to an entire website like a place that showed him everything this company knew about people. He quickly made sure that the only things that would pop up were S levels. Unfortunately, the only ones that popped up were Tubbo, Ranbu, and 2 supervillain-like people. He sighed, really hoping that this place would have been the one to get him through, or at least tell him the truth. Though it only seemed they knew nothing of what Tommy was looking for. Dead end, he guessed. Although curiosity got the better of him, and he couldn't help but click on the Witherer and the Prophet's files. He'd already met Ranbu and Tubbo. There was no reason to go through their files. Besides, he figured it was probably a violation of privacy, but he might have already crossed that line. The Witherer had a vague description that could have fit half the world population. Despite that, there wasn't much there. The Prophet had even less. They had nothing more than a vague possible description of their powers. Tommy couldn't help but smile at that. He shrugged it off and continued further in, hoping to find even a glimpse of any information, anything that could help him, or at least tell him for sure. The history of S level should be good. His working theory was that his friend was dead, so he probably wouldn't be on his active files if he was there. "What the heck do you think you're doing?" a voice rang out. Well, if his friend really was dead, then Tommy would surely be meeting him soon. That voice was too low and monotone for it to be Wilbur or Phil's, so that left one choice, the man who knew every fighting move you made before you made it. Also, the one that could probably snap Tommy in half without even trying. Technoblade. And that was the end of chapter 5, I think? Yep, that was chapter 5. Now for a quick water break. Okay, so I definitely got these chapters mixed up. I thought we had already read that one, so I accidentally gave a little spoiler that they would catch Tommy, but don't worry, I didn't spoil it too much. Okay, I'm like, should I put on my glasses? I have these glasses here. Let me see if it makes it any better. And can the V2 ring thing even read what I'm doing when I'm wearing glasses? I kind of want to put the glasses on my model just to like see what I would look like. Glasses, I feel like, are too overwhelming. They make it hard for me to read. I don't know if these are going to help me, but we'll see how this works. Please, V2 model, be able to read my face. Okay, here we go. Chapter 6. Trigger warnings. Non-consensual drug use, kidnapping, ? Child abuse, and injuries. Chapter 6. I don't think I have the ability to care anymore. What color is the sky? Tommy, you were just out there 3 weeks ago, he huffed. His breathing wasn't natural. It was labored and something was clearly wrong, although Tommy didn't have to guess. So? It doesn't take that long to forget things. What? Have you just met me or are you stupid? Tommy teased. It was Forrest and they both knew it. It wasn't Tommy talking. It was fear and the need to make it seem like everything was okay. It's blue. A pause. I think I'm seeing it for the last time today. Maybe tomorrow, depending on how far we go. You're not going anywhere, Tommy stated, like it was the fact, although they both knew it wasn't true. I'm leaving and we both know I'm not coming back, the other voice said. No, you're right. We're leaving, but unfortunately not anytime soon, Tommy replied, his arms crossed, albeit awkwardly, considering the chains around his wrists. You know, it was very smart of them to make these chains, and this wall for that matter, plastic. He shifted, feeling the familiar weight of his friend on the other side of the thin wall. They often sat like this, attempting to feel each other through the wall even though it'd only be plastic in the end. You know, if you were actually strong like you claimed to be, you could break out of those chains. His words were slurring slightly. The last dose was finally kicking in now. Well, excuse me, Mr. I have metal chains. This happens to be titanium plastic, the strongest plastic in existence. No one could break it, Tommy told him. Hey, when we get out of here, I'm thinking we get an ocean view, Tommy said. Oh? He replied with a sigh. This was not looking good. Yeah, Tommy continued. Last time I was up there, it was dusk and the sun on the water was pretty. Sunsets on the water is something I have to see daily when we get out. Yep, he agreed sarcastically. We'll have 11 bedrooms, just for the hell of it. We can change rooms every night if we want to. Room service every day so we don't have to leave our beds if we don't want to. We can go to Vegas. And do what? Asked the other with an abrupt stop. I don't know. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, Tommy replied. That's stupid. No one will believe that you actually were in Vegas if everything stays there. Tommy shrugged in reply. Maybe, but we'll know when we get there. Maybe we'll live there, so that we can talk about it. I don't think there's any oceans in Vegas. Well, there's gotta be a lake or something, Tommy huffed. There was no reply for a minute, just a little bit of shuffling. I'm tired, the other voice said. Don't go to sleep, Tommy pleaded, feeling his eyes grow wet. There was silence again. For a moment, Tommy was afraid he had already fallen asleep. It was never a good sign when that happened. Okay, the voice said. Good. What now? What do you think about having a butler? Tommy asked. A butler? Yeah, Tommy hummed. Someone to do everything that you don't want to do. Meh, he replied. It kind of sounds like here, just without the prison cells. I don't think a butler would drug you on a regular basis, Tommy said. Have you ever had one before? Not that I can remember, Tommy snorted. Then just how would you know? Tommy paused at that. You've got me there, he laughed. A quiet laugh came from his companion before silence took over the two of them. Have you seen the stars? I'm sure I have, Tommy replied. Being out at night wasn't something that the compound allowed. Do you remember what they look like? Tommy was quiet for a moment, trying to remember anything and everything to do with the stars. No, I'm sorry, Tommy answered eventually. A beat. I'll probably see the stars tonight if I don't pass out before I can. It's probably dark out now, Tommy replied. But don't worry, the view from our apartment will show every star you want. I don't think that's how this works. Tommy smiled, but it was short. There was clanging at the door to the other room opened. It's time, they said. Tommy shook his head. No, he said quietly. Oops, I said that too loudly. No, he said quietly. Come on, don't make this harder for yourself. Damaged goods are never good. He felt the warmth from his friend disappear for the first time that night, and Tommy faced the other side of the clear wall. That's not fair. We're not objects. We're people, Tommy yelled this time, although a quick glare sent his way made him quiet down. Tommy hadn't yelled at them in a long time. He knew the punishments for yelling. His friend had stumbled forward, barely catching himself on shaky legs. Please don't, Tommy cried, losing any and all sense of self-preservation. Two people stood in the doorway of his friend's room. One was a familiar and the other wasn't, but Tommy still knew dang well who they were. Don't take him, please! There was no answer from the other side of the wall, just a stern look from a familiar face. His friend stumbled, probably from all the drugs they pumped him full of, but he made his way over. No, don't go, please. This isn't fair. We're not property. We're people for goodness sake. Dang it. Don't do this, please. Please, I can't do this without him. Please, this isn't fair. Tommy cried as hot, angry tears fell down his cheeks. They felt like they were burning him, although he knew they couldn't do that. His chains prevented him from doing much, or anything really. The plastic wall was all that separated him from his friend. Plastic. It had to be freaking plastic. He hated plastic. It was so hard to work with, and right now, him trying anything would just get him hurt and his friend taken. It wasn't worth it. The unfamiliar person put their hand on his friend's shoulder, and Tommy noticed the way he tensed up. This wasn't fair. This shouldn't be happening. Tommy had long since made peace with the fact that they were trapped here, but he only made peace with that idea that since they were trapped here together. Please, Tommy begged. Goodbye, Tommy, his friend said. No! It was less of a word rather than a strangled shout of emotions. Although Tommy could never make that sound again if he tried. It sounded like something that was dying, and if Tommy was being honest, he was dying a little bit on the inside. You can't freaking do this to us, Tommy screamed. He surged forward with as much strength as he had left in him. It wasn't a lot. Throwing himself against the plastic wall, it disintegrated into nothing but ash instantly behind his fingertips. At any other time, he would have been shocked, since this shouldn't have been possible. At least not that fast. But at that moment, he didn't care. He only made it a step into the other room before the chains caught him. He struggled against them like his life depended on it. Although it wasn't quite his life in the balance, but his reason to live life was in the balance. His wrists were bent in unnatural angles, not enough to break them, but they sure as hell hurt. Not to mention, he couldn't feel the skin breaking the blood slowly dripping down his hands. He couldn't feel the plastic cracking, and he was still screaming. But it didn't last long. The chain snapped and he went flying into the other cell. He hit the wall and tried to catch his breath as he stood. He surged forward one more time, this time blindly as he felt a sharp prick on his neck. He knew it was over when his face met the floor and he could only watch his only reason in life was led away for the last time. He let his eyes roll back, hoping to never open them again as he let the familiar cold concrete floor lull him to sleep. Perhaps they would meet again in either the afterlife or the next one. Flash back to the present. "Why were you in the computers?" Phil asked. His voice was level and calm to any outsider. As long as you didn't know Phil or the voice wasn't dressing you, it seemed normal. But it was anything but. Tommy didn't say anything. He didn't look up from where he was looking at the floor. Tommy tried to make his face neutral, but he knew that it was probably scowling a bit. He couldn't help it. He was so close and he just had to be caught. It's not like he was stealing information or snooping around Ranbu or Tubbo's files. He was just trying to confirm his suspicions. Why couldn't the world just let him be? "You were looking through S-level files," Techno said. Tommy had to refrain from flinching at the tone. It was icy. Technoblade remained in his monotone voice, but with the withdrawal and completely cold. It sounded exactly like how he was spoken to at the compound. He had to remind himself that he wasn't there still, so he hadn't replied. "You came here through 2 S-level kids, so why did you do it?" Phil stressed the word kids, and Tommy could tell why. If he was worried about Tommy trying to take either of both of them, it was a good idea to prey on the fact that humans naturally wanted to protect the younger ones, the children. Normally it would have worked, but Tommy was technically a kid as well, so it probably wouldn't have done anything if he had been planning on it, which he wasn't, so it didn't even matter. Tommy could feel Wilbur's gaze on him. He knew that Wilbur was trying to read him, to get his next move and figure out what he was going to do. Tommy wasn't sure how accurate Wilbur's power was, nor how specific it was going to get, but Wilbur was at A level, meaning he was pretty frickin' powerful. His brain was honestly a mess. Half of it was screaming that he should lie, and then lie some more, because honestly, if he couldn't get any worse. If it did, who gave a flying frick, because honestly, he was done for either way. The other half was telling him to lash out. You'll get out of the anger and frustration out. Yell, get all the anger and frustration out. Make them so frustrated they left him alone so he could run. But basically his entire body was telling him to get out. But if he had done that, Wilbur would know that he was trying to do. He had to do something that wasn't either of what he wanted. He had to do something that wasn't either of what he wanted. He had to be unpredictable. Probably his entire life rested on what he chose to do in this moment. But his brain couldn't focus. It could tell which one was the right choice. It physically could not think of anything else to do. "Because it was the whole reason I agreed to come here," Tommy blurted before slapping a hand over his mouth. Well, that was an opinion Tommy hadn't thought about for a split second, but hadn't landed on because it was a horrible idea. The truth would lead to a bad ton more truths or lies that Tommy didn't really want to get into. "What?" Wilbur asked, clearly knowing he hadn't lied. He seemed to shock them based on the fact that he actually being sincere, not that he had planned it. Tommy paused, but he knew he couldn't take it back. "That's why I agreed to come here. Honestly, I never wanted help or really to be here, but Ranbu mentioned that you had resources, so I figured that I could find what I was looking for here." Phil had since shifted and crossed his arms, his face not showing any emotion, still appearing calm. And what might that be? "What were you looking for?" Phil asked. Tommy didn't say any more. Honestly, he had no right. Talking so much would be rude, although he supposed it wouldn't matter at all too much, considering his friend was probably dead right now. Although disrespecting the dead was probably not the best idea, especially not him. He'd come back and cuff Tommy for being a bad boy. "From our standpoint, it looks like you're working with someone to take S levels, and if you were looking for someone specific, you certainly have 2 here. So let's ask again. Who were you looking for?" "I wasn't looking for Tubbo or Ranbu, first of all. I wasn't even in their files, and you can check that. Second, if I was going to take them, why wouldn't I have done it when I had them alone? I would have been 100 times easier and you wouldn't have even known until it was too late," Tommy countered, although it might have been wrong for him to accurately describe it. Whatever. "So who are you looking for then?" Phil tilted his head. Tommy bit his lip and refrained from talking much more. It was practically criminal that this was the longest Tommy had spoken to Phil and Techno. Wilbur had seriously liked this kid, and whatever he had done in the computer room, surely it couldn't be too bad. Tommy was a good kid, and he hadn't even lied when he clearly wanted to. Even if Wilbur hadn't been using his powers, Tommy's reaction to his own words shocked him, although they practically glowing truth that appeared over Tommy's head right now before he started speaking really tied it together for him. It was clear he was telling the truth. But he was also reluctant to say more. There was obviously something more there, and it was clear that whatever Tommy was looking for, it wasn't Ronbu or Tubbo. He made good points, and Wilbur had checked quickly. Tommy wasn't planning on hurting either of them. Still, Tommy couldn't say much more. He was hurting. Wilbur could tell. He wanted to leave and never wanted this to happen. But Wilbur also knew that they needed answers. He couldn't just go through the company's computers. Wilbur also had to change his password now and get away with it. You're only making things worse for yourself as long as you stay quiet, Techno said, and Wilbur winced as he saw Tommy tense up ever so slightly. Despite everything, Tommy was still traumatized. Whatever he had gone through, it was rough. Perhaps, even if he had bad intentions here, he was being forced. I was looking for an old friend of mine, Tommy admitted, and the glowing truth came up again. Wilbur figured it was safe to stop using his powers now. Phil raised an eyebrow. An S level? He asked, clearly not believing him. Wilbur almost cut in, making sure Phil knew that Tommy had been telling the truth, although Tommy beat him to it. I don't know, Tommy replied. I figured he was. He was really strong, but I don't even know how to begin to describe his powers or anything, but our containment center was kind of messed up, and I know nothing about him. Though I was either wrong about the S-level stuff, or you know nothing either, so this was a waste anyway. Tommy shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal, but his tone and his voice were definitely defeated. Phil turned to Wilbur. He nodded, and Tommy had been telling the truth. They were in your containment center, Phil asked, more emotion slowly starting to seep back into his voice. That was a good sign anyway. Tommy nodded. We were cellmates. I mean, not really. We had a wall between us, but it was plastic and really easy to feel heat through it and talk through it, Tommy muttered. It was hard to say much about each other. And do you think he's an S-level? Techno asked, a little less accusatory than he was before. I don't see what else he could be, Tommy said. Look, there were all kinds of people and powers out there, but what I've seen with him, it had to be an S-level, or else I don't want to see what an S-level can do, because that stuff was powerful. Why were you looking for him? Phil asked. I want to know where he is, Tommy said, a little sadly. Wilbur noted that. He, got out, so to speak, before I did. I want to know where he is. He swallowed thickly. Something wasn't right about this. There was something more to this. Could be unregistered, Techno said, clearly thinking out loud. He'd be dangerous and possibly in trouble. An unregistered S-level is practically above the law. Deniability and all that, Phil muttered. Tommy seemingly shrunk down, thinking about the implications. Wilbur would, too. It seemed like Phil and Techno wanted to use Tommy's S-level's friend. So? Wilbur prompted, hoping to help Tommy at least a little bit. Right, Phil seemed to remember Tommy was there. We'll help you find your friend, if you agree to help us with that. Tommy instantly brightened and nodded eagerly. Anything, he replied. Phil held up a hand for him to wait a second. And, although what I'm about to ask you isn't a requirement, we do want to at least ask, would you help us in taking down your old containment center? Tommy paused. Taking down the compound was a lot different than taking down a containment center. The compound was not a containment center, for one, and secondly, there was literally nothing they weren't willing to do when it came to their detainees. Tommy would know, firsthand or by watching what happened to his friend, mainly because of him. Why would you think he hadn't escaped sooner? It could be good. Taking down the compound would probably be a good for everyone, but it would take admitting Tommy lied. He liked these people. Well, he liked Tubbo, Ronbu, and Wilbur was okay too. He didn't want them throwing him out or using him like the compound did. It wasn't the same as Ronbu. He wasn't the same as Ronbu. Things can change and Tommy didn't like that. He was afraid and he had a frickin' right to be. I don't know, Tommy muttered. They're not hurting anyone anymore. He hadn't quite meant to say that last part. What do you mean? They questioned. I was the last one there. When I escaped, there was no one left. I'm not even sure I can tell you where it is, Tommy trailed off. That's okay, Phil said, his normal voice back. Tommy relaxed at that. They liked him again. This was good. You could stay here, at least for a little while. Could you at least describe your friend? Tommy brightened again. He liked this. He could actually do this part. Despite hating the compound, he liked remembering his friend. It was the only good thing he can actually remember. Sure, he said, after nodding enthusiastically. You were not responsible for him, Eric said. And this is a flash to a different period. Eric said firmly, completely ignoring Wilbur's question. Wilbur sighed in annoyance. It wasn't the first time they had been through this. Yes, we are. Are you sure you can't get anything at all from them? Wilbur asked desperately. No, Wilbur, he is not your fault. Whatever happened, whatever he's done and whatever has been done to him, it's not your fault, Eric explained. You and your family had no clue, and it's not like you never tried to help. Eric, he was our responsibility, Wilbur muttered. We knew him, Eric. We should have protected him better. His powers, the wither effect, everything. We knew people would be after him, to use him, and we let him disappear, Wilbur said. Did you see anybody take him? No. Did you see him get up and walk away without trying to stop him? No. Did you do anything you could to try and find him again? Yes, but there is no buts, Wilbur. The Witherer is not your fault. He's an S level, for goodness sake. An S level that has destructive powers and are on the loose. He's killing people and leaving nothing. Gosh, we don't even have a real name for him. We never got his, Wilbur cried. Please, is there anything? Is there really nothing? Eric sighed. Wilbur, we all knew him. We all knew the Witherer long before any of this. If it's your fault, it's all of ours. No, Eric, that's not how this works. We brought him in. We basically created him, Wilbur muttered. Eric let out a breath. You didn't. You need to stop blaming yourself for this. We should have seen it. How many people have died because of the Witherer, because of the Prophet? Now you're responsible for the Prophet. Why are you responsible for the Prophet? Eric sighed, adjusting the glasses. I can see why you might think you're responsible for the Witherer, but the Prophet? The Prophet was obviously inspired by the Witherer. S-levels learned from each other. They were public long before Ranboo or Tubbo were. Ranboo and Tubbo aren't public, Eric replied. Exactly! The Prophet saw the only S-level they could find. The only one like themselves. They saw that, and now we have real-life supervillains in the world, making it harder for kids like Tubbo and Ranboo, and we are the ones responsible for it. We let the Witherer loose, and now people are dying, Wilbur said seriously. Eric hadn't seen him like this in a long time. Wilbur, you never intended for anything like this to happen, Eric told him. It's not. Intent and impact are two different things. I'm sure you know this well. Wilbur paused, unsure if this was a little too low. Eric didn't say anything. So please, do you have anything from them? Eric sighed. His power, Wither. It doesn't just destroy the body. It completely destroys the soul with it. The Wither effect leaves the bodies as you've seen them, shriveled up and already decaying, but still here. However, it's like the soul that was the thing killed, not the body, Eric told him. So there's nothing from the victims, Wilbur asked, sounding a little more broken every time he's asked. No, I'm sorry, Eric said. I can't speak to something that's no longer there. The soul is gone. I can't get a sketch or any information on him from anyone. They're all gone, Wilbur. I'm sorry, I can't do more. It's not your fault, Wilbur sighed. I can try and look up old revival methods, Eric hummed. They've never worked in the past, but perhaps I can try it on the souls rather than the living bodies. But that's the best I can do. You know revival methods? Theorized, but yes, Eric replied. It's experimental at best and just inane ideas from the past at worst. Although the methods have some truth to them, I'll have to ask around, perhaps a different ritual or two, but all I can do from here is try. I would appreciate it, Wilbur said. We can't let him continue like this. It's our fault. He's out there and we need to stop it. It's not, Eric said a final time, but I understand why you feel obligated to help. I will try the revival methods. However, I believe that it will be the last hope for my help in this case. I understand, Wilbur said, looking at his friend. Eric nodded at him before leaving. Eric's family came from a long line of magic users, those who had powers before powers were a thing. Revival spells were something you could only find in Eric's bloodline. They were lucky to have Eric on their side at any given moment. Very few people who weren't A-level were wanted by the government, wanted for a job anyway, and Eric was one of them. Wilbur had never been more glad for Techno's vagueness and social awkwardness. Eric probably wouldn't have come in if Wilbur or Phil had written into the message about needing everyone to be ready at all times just in case. Wilbur had desperately needed an update on what Eric had been looking into. Although the news wasn't good, Wilbur had hope. It was all he could have right now. And that is chapter 6 of Sunsets and Freedom. I'm like, how long is the next chapter? Should I just go ahead and read the next chapter, or... I think my voice is probably too tired. We should take a break. So that's where we're gonna end it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Oh, and this chapter in the notes, it's so great because the author Annex first mentions the Discord server that they would create, which I have many great memories from being on and talking with other people and just experiencing Annex's other fanfics and stuff. So good memories, and looking at all the comments just brings, yeah, I just love it all. Sorry, I'm rambling, but thank you guys for joining us today. And yeah, I looked at your comment about the background music, and I'm like, I might need to find some different background music for these more intense fanfics and stuff, because the background music doesn't really fit the theme and stuff. But thank you all for joining, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and hopefully my voice can recover. I'm sure it's gonna recover. It doesn't even sound that bad, but I can feel my throat being like, bleh, you talk too much. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you all on Thursday for the next stream. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your day. Let me get my waving emotion. Wave. Bye, guys.